Okay, so can we continue with our workshop? So I would like to open the third session of our workshop, and it is basically about practical cooperation between the Parliament and the government in EU approximation process. So basically these two sessions that are ahead from us will be moving us forward to practical issues, so you can discuss with the experts here how to coordinate between the Parliament and the government, how to communicate, how to use special IT tools and electronic databases in practice. And then within the third session we will briefly address the issues connected with organization of work inside parliaments, establishing some kind of special structures and special departments. So I would like to open the session, and without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Csaba to tell us a little bit more about the cooperation between the government and the parliament in a Hungarian case. Csaba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So regarding the cooperation between the government and the Hungarian National Assembly, you know what is always a big question regarding legislation is the foreseeability of legislation. Also for the MPs, for the government, and for the electors as well. So in this regard, the starting reference document is the so-called semi-annual working program of the government. So what is that? I will speak about it in a bit detailed. It is, since 1994, the government is obliged to send it to the parliament before each ordinary session starts. It means in the Hungarian National Assembly we have two ordinary sessions. One is from February the 1st till the middle of June, and the second is from the 1st of September till the middle of December. And this program has to be submitted to the Parliament. So for the autumn session, it has to be submitted by the end of the summer session. It means that by the middle of June. It means that on the 15th of June, the Parliament have already, and all the MPs has access to this legislative working program, which is containing roughly 50 bills, depending, of course, on the domestic conditions, but 50 bills which are supposed to be adopted in the forthcoming session. It's not an exhaustive list, because some changes always took place. But at least this list has had to contain, and still has to contain, the title of the bill, the expected date of the submission of the bill to the Parliament, the length of the bill, the sponsor of the bill, and the reason, a short description why this bill had to be submitted. We are still at the first slide. So this half-year working program is the basic document for the cooperation, generally for legislation between the government and the Parliament. It's an open document. You have access on the website of the Parliament to this. The next stage is the meeting of the so-called House Committee. What is this House Committee? It consists of the Speaker, the faction leaders, vice speakers, and also members from the government side, and also from the parliamentary administration, some high-ranking officials. And they discuss this working program of the government. And here's come the point. They select those which serve legal approximation goals. Because if the program contained enough information, then it was already at that time obvious for the Parliament which bills had approximation objective. And this made easier for the Parliament to organize its sessions week by week, month by month. And later on, it made it easier for the committees to set up their own working plan for that given session. You see, these steps comes after each other. And as I mentioned earlier, bills which aimed at transposing EU acts were adopted according to this normal legislative procedure. And regarding the cooperation between the government and the parliament, we're still at the end of the first slide. I don't have to only just speak about legislation, but only about oversight. Because these two traditional parliamentary functions had to go hand in hand also regarding approximation. And if I say oversight, I of course think of the basic parliamentary tools like interpellations, questions, which take place on the plenary. And now we can go to the second slide, please. And this is the level of committees. Of course, we have standing committees dealing with all kinds of issues, domestic and European. And hearings. I want to underline the role of hearings because, of course, usually it was the Committee on European Integration Affairs which had lots of hearings regarding approximation and integration. But other committees also had the right to invite members of government responsible for integration and approximation issues. Of course, it depended on the committee itself whether it used this possibility or not. In the case of the Committee on European Integration Affairs, of course, this competence was applied and used very regularly. And you can read two quotations on the slides. These are both from the Constitution. It's the previous Constitution, but the current one has similar regulations. It means that the Parliament may delegate a committee for the investigation of any issue. You know, it's a special provision regarding investigation committee. But this was the provision which was used in 1992 to set up the first committee in the Parliament to deal with European integration affairs. Later on, this provision was just used for domestic political issues, but first it was used in 1992 for parliamentary oversight. And the second one is at least so important that those who requested to appear before the committee, they are obliged by the Constitution to appear and to testify before such committees. You know, it's an important measure or provision of the Constitution which is close connection with the level of the representation of the government in committee meetings. Because if in committee meetings the government is there with political level representation, then there will be a good cooperation between the given committee and the government. And I want to underline the significance of political representation, especially in the case of Committee on European Integration Affairs. Maybe I come to the last slide, which concerns this committee. Since 1993, the government is obliged to provide information to the National Assembly regarding the implementation of the association agreement. So it is, you can see, it is an annual obligation. It means a written report which was available for the public, which contained all the measures which within that particular year the government carried out regarding the implementation of the association agreement. And this report had to be debated and discussed on an open meeting of the Committee on European Integration Affairs. And later on, in some cases, other committees like the Committee on Foreign Affairs also discussed this bill. And you know, this is a resolution from 1993, but it is still applied regarding European membership and European integration in general, this annual obligation of the government to report the Parliament. And just last comment on committee meetings. So generally, you know, what government is doing, public has no information about it. And the Parliament has a great opportunity to provide public access to discussions which are held on EU approximation. In the Hungarian system, the plenary meetings were broadcasted all the time, verbatim minutes were taken and published on the website of the Parliament. Committee meetings are open to the public, but are not broadcasted. So it's an opportunity for committees to live with it and to inform the public at large. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you especially for clarifying us the necessity of the precise legislative planning and regular information or informing of the Parliament when it comes to the EU legal approximation. I would like to give the floor now to Milan to show us how in Slovakia the cooperation between the Parliament and the government functioned in practice. The Milan, floor is yours.
Thank you, Natalia. I will come back to this relationship between the government and the Parliament in Slovakia, which means I will be speaking about the Parliament as a somehow sacred institution, but I'm aware it is not, and it is also the place which makes a lot of mistakes. A famous joke about the mistakes of the Parliament is the answer to the question, what is the camel? Camel is a beautiful horse which underwent the parliamentary procedures. So sometimes this happens in Slovakia as well, but in this part of the presentation I will be depicting our Parliament as the really sacred institution. So I told you before that the Parliament should be the only lawmaking body in our system. The approach which allowed us to pass these regulations of government for approximation was disbalancing the system, and now I would like to show you some detailed conditions how can be the government controlled. I referred to the positive list of areas where the government can legislate with these regulations. There is also area which means for the government the ban to legislate. So the government cannot pass these regulations when it should touch the human rights, for example. The state budget, next slide please, the state budget cannot be passed in this way, and there are some more detailed conditions in our constitution as well. And for example, the government cannot establish new state body through these regulations. I told you that who does the work has the power. So the Parliament in Slovakia needs to somehow bring back the power to itself. So we imposed on the government two duties: to inform the government with the intent to legislate through these regulations on a half-year basis. And there is also the duty to inform Parliament on the half-year basis in which fields the government passed the the approximation regulations of the government. So the Parliament is informed very well, and the Parliament can tell the government to bring the proposal to the Parliament, not as the regulation, not to pass that as a regulation of the government, but to prepare it as a draft of the law, so the Parliament will have a detailed control on the lawmaking process in respective field. This is the theory. The practice is that the government has not enough capacities to control the government, so the government in Slovakia in this field really gained the power in a very strong way. Another cons in the field of the legal order is that this creation of these regulations for approximation is destroying the so-called Kelsen's pyramidal structure of our legal order. So there is a huge question where to put in the pyramidal structure these governmental regulations. They are transposing directives, as the bills passed by Parliament are. So the question is, are they on the same level or are they a level below? In some countries, you have even so-called immunity of legislative acts which are transposing EU law. We don't have such a provision in our constitution, so there is really huge question where to put in this structure of legal acts the so-called regulation of approximation passed by the government. So that is all of my side in this block. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Based on the Slovak experience, we can see that there are many ways how to do EU legal approximation in practice. And so in this case, it was partially done by the approximation decrees of the government. But the question is that in every case like this, the politicians and the parliamentary staffers need to ensure the constitutional balance, meaning that there should be some checks and balances, so the parliament needs to be informed regularly and needs to conduct high quality oversight functions, because otherwise the government will have in place the tools that will be without any control from the side of the parliament and the citizens. Now I would like to give the floor to Martin to tell us a bit more about how the government and the parliament cooperated in pre-accession period in the Czech case. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So if we could look at the first slide. What you have on the slide is examples of cooperation between the Czech government and the Czech parliament. I've mentioned them already, this preliminary consultation procedure, but also the committee sessions during the legislative procedure, the inclusion of political fractions, the deputies' clubs in the inter-ministerial consultation procedure, and also the different databases that Parliament has been given access to, both staffers as well as MPs. But perhaps first we could ask the question of why ensure this kind of cooperation. It is, I suppose, on the one hand obvious, but on the other hand, perhaps we'll get some better clues if we go through these questions of why. Well, perhaps number one, the Parliament and deputies have broad powers to ask questions in the form of interpellations or in the form of written questions. Committees in the Czech system, probably quite similarly to your system, have the power to require ministers to attend and have the power to ask questions to ministers and to heads of state agencies and state bodies. So the government is facing a parliament which has a constitutional basis and power to ask questions, Why does it ask questions? Well, because of the representative function. So even government MPs who supposedly will be voting along with the wishes of the government still feel the need from time to ask questions to ensure that government informs constituents of the MPs through Parliament. So questions are being asked, even by government MPs, in order to fulfill that general representative function, but also so to get information shared with the public, to perform the control function. Even within political parties, there is not always complete unity, at least in the Czech system. So not all MPs from the government parties are big fans of the government always. So you can have government MPs or MPs representing the government political parties also asking questions because there may be some discussion within the political party that there's not complete unity and it takes some convincing. The government will have to convince even the government MPs. So questions get asked for various reasons. The government is able to avoid some questions by proactively informing the Parliament, which could be through regular information that is provided to the committees, to the Committee for European Integration, especially regarding the government programming, so that the Parliament is not surprised, like Csaba said. So the government informs about the legislative priorities. The explanatory reports to individual pieces of legislation also provide information, and if that information is there, then questions can also be avoided because the information is provided proactively. Staffers as well as MPs can be given access to databases of the government, which also helps to answer questions even before they get asked. So a lot of this also reduces the burden on the government. If it's able to provide transparency, then many questions don't need to be asked in a formal way because they're answered even before they are asked. So that's a general reason for, cooperation facilitates this. It facilitates the Parliament's performance of its control and representative function, because even if the information was not provided, then it would get asked in questions, and that's difficult for ministries to answer many questions. It's time-consuming. The government is also interested in promulgating its legislation. So the government has a definite interest in ensuring that the Parliament passes the government bills. And the government has an interest in minimizing incorrect amendments that would violate EU law. So we have a principle in the government, let's say, procedures, that each line ministry appoints one person from its legislative department, and that one person has full responsibility for following the bill through the legislative process. For that person who is really responsible for following the government bill through the legislative process, he or she is responsible for following the bill through the pre-legislative process, so through the interministerial consultations, through the regulatory impact analysis, through discussions in cabinet, but also through the Parliament and through the President's signature. So that one person is there from the moment the line ministry begins to draft to the moment the law is promulgated in the collection of laws. And that person in the ministry is interested in, and he's responsible, it's his task to ensure that the bill is passed. And it has been our experience that it's not enough to have government MPs who are obedient, because they are not always obedient. They don't always vote exactly as the government wishes, because they have concerns, which they hear from their constituents. In a sense, the government is interested to avoid being surprised in Parliament, because the government wants to make sure that the bill is passed with as little amendments as possible. And if there are amendments, that those amendments will be acceptable to the government. Primarily, the government is interested in ensuring that government MPs will vote on the bill as the government recommends. which is to adopt the bill and only to vote for amendments which the government has approved. So again, cooperation with the Parliament is needed to ensure that the government MPs, the MPs from the ruling parties, don't surprise the government. So from that perspective, the government wants to ensure that the government MPs are on board not only because they are obedient, because we know that they're not always, but also on board because they believe in what the government is doing. How do you get the MPs to believe in what the government is doing? Is if there's a feeling that their constituents want this. So, as we heard from the Hungarian perspective, the dealings in the Parliament, the government has a good channel to the public through the Parliament to build a consensus. So, including MPs in the pre-legislative process helps to avoid surprises during the legislative process. Informing through various channels, including the various databases that we have, is a good way to avoid being surprised by your own MPs. Giving constituents, through their MPs, regular information on the general direction of the legislative process also helps to avoid, or of the approximation process, also helps to avoid being surprised by the government's own MPs. So those are the reasons why the government is interested in cooperation with the Parliament, especially because it wants to make sure that the government MPs will vote as the government wishes. And what the government wishes is not always automatic that all MPs will support it, because we have coalition governments. So you need to get all coalition MPs on board. And you need more than just an agreement at the government level. One reason for that is that at the government level, a small coalition party can be outvoted. If you have a very small coalition party, they can disagree in the cabinet, but the government will still adopt a bill for transmission to Parliament because they are outvoted. How do you make sure that that coalition partner will convince its MPs to vote for a bill when the coalition ministers voted against it? The minority ministers from the small coalition party voted against it in the cabinet. Well, you have to work with the MPs so that they don't surprise you. And these tools, inclusion in the pre-legislative process, access to databases, has helped to avoid surprises. And one last thing. The line ministry is concerned with amendments. It is concerned that amendments will defeat the purpose of the bill. It is concerned that amendments presented by MPs might defeat the approximation, let's say, purpose of the bill, which is why it is really the government feels that it is its absolute responsibility to check these amendments. The Parliament creates, through the rules of procedure, enough time for the government to check, which could mean, having at least a few days for the line ministry to check whether the amendment is compatible with the government's objective. And then the government representative can tell the Parliament the government's position on each amendment. Primarily, the government is concerned with amendments that have a realistic chance of being passed because they're supported by some government MPs. So for amendments that are supported by some government MPs, it's all the more important to check. And it's not really the parliamentary staff that do this, but it's the government that is absolutely concerned with the amendments, and the parliamentary staff can help facilitate that the government knows about the amendments, that it has enough time, and that the government really checks it. But this is what the lawyer from the line ministry who is responsible for the bill does. If there is a bad outcome, meaning an amendment is adopted which violates EU law, this employee of the line ministry will feel it in his paycheck. They will feel it because they have failed. It is their responsibility to make sure that the MPs don't surprise the government, and if they do, then there's a problem. It's one thing that the MPs will have a political decision that they make, but the government needs to know about it and needs to have time to lobby the government MPs to get back into line, essentially. So this employee from the line ministry is really fully responsible for knowing about disobedience, in a sense, from the government MPs. and for having a discussion with them. And if he does everything he can and still he fails and the MPs adopt something which is contrary to the government's objective, well, okay, well, that happens, that's life. But it's inappropriate for the government to not be aware. So there's always this one person who has this full responsibility in the ministry, a lawyer, to follow, to know, and to try to explain to MPs the objective of the bill. And if they don't know, if they fail in understanding what the MPs will want to support, then they are failing in their duties, and they will certainly feel it in their bonuses or in some of their salary that they will get. So it's good to have somebody personally responsible for making sure that the ministry knows what is happening in Parliament, and the parliamentary staff can help to transmit this information, can help to facilitate the communication with the line ministry. But it's in the line ministry's interest to check the amendments. Okay, so I think that's all for me.
Thank you very much. Before opening the discussion, because we are here for discussion with you as well, so I would like to give the floor to Bartosz for his brief introduction, and then we can continue with the discussion. So Bartosz, the floor is yours.
Thank you. When we talk about the cooperation between government and Parliament, we should see it at two different levels, at political level and staff level. So let me start from the very end of this political level. Now, since the accession, we have it regulated. We have the legal act regulating cooperation of the government and Parliament with regard to EU matters. The legal act regulates the obligation of the government, information obligation, the rights of Parliament, what information, what documents have to be sent to Parliament. But before the accession, there was no such act. And the cooperation between government and Parliament was regulated, if it was regulated at all, was regulated by political documents. Of course, it has to suit in a general legislative procedure or the constitutional rules concerning the position of government and Parliament, but there was no special provisions concerning cooperation with regard to EU matters, and especially with EU approximation matters. So the government was obliged by political declaration of Parliament to prepare every year a legislative plan concerning approximation, plan on approximation of our legislation. It was updated every year. Every year it was presented to the Parliament, and then the Parliament asked its service to write an opinion on this plan. We mainly checked what changed since the last year. Then the government was also obliged, also by the political declaration, to prepare the annual reports first. Just like in the Hungarian case, it was a report on the implementation of the association agreement. Then the government started to prepare reports on the state of preparation to Poland's membership within the European Union. But these were political documents based on political obligations. The only aspect of cooperation that was somehow regulated was the checking of the compatibility of draft laws. As I mentioned in the first part of the seminar, we had a somehow mixed system of checking the compatibility of the draft laws with the EU acquis. The government was, of course, responsible, had its own legal service responsible for checking conformity of government drafts. Then in 1997, I think, such a unit was created within the Parliament, and we were responsible for checking the drafts that were brought to the Parliament by the MPs, by Senate, by President, and by the citizens. Every drafts that were not brought by the government. But what to do with the amendments? So we decided that we don't have enough people to check the amendments, all the amendments. So the rules of procedure oblige government to check all the amendments to every bill. The government was not happy with this solution, but they understood that there had to be someone who checks all the amendments. If you want to have this system without any holes, there should be someone who checks everything. So the government was checking all the amendments after first reading, after second reading, also the amendments proposed by the Senate. It was not an easy job because, especially during the years before the accession, when the Parliament was overloaded with a lot of drafts approximating our law to EU acquis, the committee that was working on this approximation of law worked until very late in the evening, and at the, let's say, 11 or 12 in the night, when they stopped working, the chairman of the committee asked the government service to prepare an opinion for the next day for the morning. So they had to work during the night to prepare such an opinion to all the amendments. Of course, some lawyers from the government legal service, from the Office for the Committee of European Integration, took part in all the committee sittings, that were concerned with an approximation of law. So they were aware of these amendments, and sometime they were able to give oral opinion just on the spot. But usually they were asked to prepare written opinions. If something was more complicated, they were asked to prepare a written opinion, and it was the time that was given for them was usually very short. So after many years, I think 5 years ago, the government managed to get rid of this obligation. But before the accession, they were responsible also for checking the compatibility with EU law of all the amendments that were proposed during the legislative process. But that was the, let's say, political level of cooperation, and you cannot forget about the cooperation at staff level, because in every ministry, both in Parliament and in every ministry, there are people who write this opinion, who write these draft laws. You shouldn't hesitate to call them, even if you don't know them. But of course, if you know them, it helps. So what was the helping tool was the organizing of joint seminars, joint conferences for the legal services of the government and legal staff of the Parliament. We could meet each other, we could talk, and it's different. When you phone to a person you know, you can ask different questions than you could ask to a person you don't know and you call for the first time. Sometimes during such a joint events, we could also ask those people, for example, why did you write such a strange opinion? We know your style of opinion, and this opinion was different. And they could explain us, for example, that there was some political reason they had to use different words. Or sometimes the government could explain why they are unofficially is people could explain why they are approximating in this way or not the other way, or to this extent or not and the other way. Sometimes it was also the possibility to ask for some documents that were not secret, but just the government forget to send to Parliament, or just perhaps sometimes it was not aware that these documents could be helpful to someone, and we could phone and we could ask for such documents. So don't forget about personal contacts. It will also help you with the cooperation between two organs, between government and Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you especially for sharing with us the experience how to check the amendments of the members of parliaments that are submitted throughout the legislative process. So based on the Czech and Polish cases, we have heard that this was the responsibility of the line ministry in their two cases. Okay, so without any further ado, I would like to open the discussion. So we would like to hear your remarks, comments, questions. Please. Yeah, Mr. Krianga.
Eu aș vrea să-l întreb pe domnul Milan cu experiența Slovaciei. Deci dumnealui a menționat despre faptul că guvernul este în drept să dea reglementări pe domeniul armonizării fără a implica Parlamentul. Acum mă întreb, că am văzut în slide-ul dumneavoastră, articolul 72 din Constituție, care stabilește că unica autoritate legislativă este Parlamentul. Deci, întrebarea constă în faptul că această reglementare care dă guvernul rezultă din legile adoptate de Parlament și se referă la actele secundare, sau aceasta se referă la actele primare de armonizare.
Thank you for this question. It looks maybe not so good from the position of Article 72 of our Constitution, but you need to take into the consideration the Article 120, which allows the Parliament to pass the law on which stipulates the conditions under which the government can pass these regulations, these decrees of government related to the approximation. So based on Article 120 and based on this Law 19 from the year 2002, it is constitutional and legal to have such regulations of the government or decrees of the government. But you are right, there is a problem we face now. This law number 19 from 2002 allows the government to even pass the bylaws, so on the level below these decrees, in order to harmonize with EU law. And from the point of view of the bill, which stipulates the passing of these decrees, it is legal. But from the point of view of our Constitution, this provision is unconstitutional. Nobody up to now complained about such a practice, but it is practice in Slovakia, because you have parts of EU law which are really of technical matter. So usually these technical annexes to directives are transposed via these bylaws, even below the regulation of government.
Să înțeleg eu că aceasta este o cale de excepție și atunci când este urgență, doar atunci intervine guvernul, probabil. O altă întrebare am către domnul Martin. Ce se referă la verificarea amendamentelor, și dacă am înțeles corect, verificarea amendamentelor de către guvern. Noi, în cadrul procedurii parlamentare, avem dreptul Guvernului de a emite avize la proiectele de legi. De asemenea, avem în Constituție și în regulamentul Parlamentului referitoare la avizarea obligatorie a amendamentelor ce țin de materie bugetară. Și avem regulamentul Parlamentului ce țin de acceptarea oricărui amendament din partea autorului. Adică dacă vine autorul guvernul și deputatul vine cu un amendament, autorul ar trebui să spună acceptă sau nu acceptă. Și prin prisma aceasta ar fi logic ca autorul, adică guvernul, să verifice și dimensiunea armonizării. Deci, în acest context, vreau să concretizați dacă se referă avizarea guvernului sau verificarea guvernului, anume pe dimensiunea armonizării.
So let me start by answering this last question. It's a general requirement. So for EU acts, approximation will be a key issue, but the government will certainly give an opinion on other aspects, constitutionality, compliance with general government coalition agreements, for example, compliance with whether the government thinks it's a good amendment or a bad amendment for any number of reasons. But what also needs to be said is it doesn't mean that the Parliament is incapable of making its own opinion. For example, the parliamentary staff can certainly be requested to check the compatibility of an amendment. But we tried to limit this to on request, which means if a committee requests for the parliamentary staff to check the compatibility of an amendment, certainly that can be done. It used to be done in the past, for example, that for certain kinds of amendments, it was more or less automatic, that there was also some kind of check in the Parliament by the parliamentary staff. But I was just saying that the government always gives or is asked by the Parliament in the plenary to submit its opinion regarding all amendments, and that opinion will include the result of what the government believes, whether the amendment is compatible with EU law, but also constitutionality and other things. And the parliamentary staff are often consulted, but usually on a ad hoc basis. You know, a committee or the rapporteur can contact the research service or the legislative department and can request the staffers to also make their own opinion, and this would then usually be given to the rapporteur, and he could use that opinion from the parliamentary staff. But we didn't have this rule that every single amendment had to be checked by the parliamentary staff because we didn't have that capacity.
Any other questions, remarks, or comments? Yes, Constantin?
Constantin Butnaru, Comisia Politică Externe. Am o întrebare către reprezentantul Parlamentului Ungariei. Din câte am înțeles, odată cu armonizarea legislației, Comisia Politică Externă a Ungariei a fost invadată de un număr foarte mare de proiecte care veneau într-o armonizare legislației Ungariei la acquis comunitar. Soluția pentru ca Comisia să activeze mai bine a fost crearea unei subcomisii care a fost mecanismul de implementare a acestei subcomisii a fost că ea a fost de fapt trasat de la dimensiunea politică și responsabilitatea acestei subcomisii, din câte am înțeles eu, se rezuma la armonizarea legislației. Spuneți-mi, rog, cum practic activa această subcomisie în baza a căror regulamente sau prevederi, care era dimensiunea responsabilităților acestei comisii și A doua întrebare o am către toți reprezentanții, cei ce se referă la capitolul raportare. Noi cunoaștem că, conform acordului de asociere, există și o responsabilitate a țării care urmează să adere de a raporta instituțiilor Uniunii Europene despre procesul de armonizare și de implementare a acordului de asociere. Dacă în practica dumneavoastră s-a întâlnit sau v-ați confruntat sau ați raportat ca instituții, ca Parlamentul, ați raportat instituțiilor Uniunii Europene despre procesul de armonizare, cum era desfășurat procesul respectiv și cine era responsabil pentru întocmirea rapoartelor respective?
So, Csaba, could you please answer the first question?
Yes, so the first question was regarding the subcommittee, which operated between 1995 and 1998. So basically, in our parliamentary system, every standing committee is entitled to set up a subcommittee, which members are the members of the committee itself, on any kind of particular issue which belongs to the competence of the standing committee. So it's, and this constitutional provision was used in 1995 as the parliament really first met with legal approximation issue. And yes, this was a small committee, 4 members, and it was a totally new task at that time for the parliament to deal with approximation. So these 4 members were the first who tried to make them familiar with approximation, with the looking at EU or EC directives and regulation. So it was a kind of experiment for the parliament itself, whether it's possible to deal with approximation on a subcommittee level. Because the subcommittee level actually prepared the committee meetings. And if on a given bill there was a discussion on subcommittee level, then of course on the committee level that particular agenda was much smoother, it didn't take too much time, etc., etc. So that's why the subcommittee work a bit reduced the work of the Committee on European Integration Affairs in the field of approximation. This is basically the structure, how this subcommittee and the committee work together. Later on, from 1998, the situation a bit changed, but I will speak about later on about the committees. And regarding reporting, I just want first just a short remark. Yes, this obligation was there, but again, it was done by the government, the reporting to the European Commission on the implementation of the association agreement. So formally, the Parliament, the Hungarian National Assembly, took note about the report itself, about the fact that this report was sent, and later on about the assessment of the European Commission. But the Parliament, the Hungarian National Assembly, as an organ itself, didn't adopt any kind of report which was sent to the European institutions. Thank you.
Bartosz, can you please answer the question on the reporting towards EU institutions?
It was the same in case of Poland. Parliament didn't report to anyone. It was the government who reported to European Commission and to Parliament. Later on, the Parliament was informed on the European Commission opinion on the government report, but the Parliament was not reporting to anyone. I can't imagine this.
Milan, how was it in Slovak case?
I have to say it was the same. I would like to clarify maybe this reporting and this communication. The technical approach, which means the information, how far are the duties of the country fulfilled, this is done always by the government or some body connected to the government, and the report is going to the Commission. So we are back to this constitutional disbalancing. And there is also communication, but not on this technical level, but on the political level, which means the communication between the national parliament and the European Parliament. That are the so-called joint committees, or how do you call it, whatever. But you have to separate this political approach, always done by the government or some governmental body, and this political approach done between the parliaments.
And Martin, could you tell us a bit more about the Czech case?
So yes, same situation in the Czech Republic. The Committee for European Integration took note of these various reports coming from the government, coming from the European Commission. So I talked about the regular Commission reports. So those would certainly be taken note of and discussed in the Committee for European Integration, as well as any government reporting. And if there were questions, then very frequently either the government ministers or during the negotiation phase, the negotiator of the government was invited to discuss these ongoing issues and to present the government's reporting and to present the government's position. So that's a government task. On the other hand, within the scope of parliamentary diplomacy, because MPs are engaged at various levels and in various bodies in discussions with their counterparts from the European Parliament, certainly, if needed, they would request background information to be prepared by the research service, which ended up being the focus point for EU expertise. It wasn't entirely clear, and even today it's not entirely clear under the organizational rules that we should be the only focus point, because the legislative department also has an important role. But in practice, we have become the focus point, this research service for EU expertise, and they would be consulted to prepare background materials whenever needed. So at the level of meetings of the President of the Chamber with his counterpart in the European Parliament, at the level of bilateral discussions between committee members with committee members from the European Parliament, any joint bodies when they were meeting, this background information could be provided by the Parliamentary Research Service and was used to varying degrees over time, depending on policy area, for example. But that's not the reporting that you are talking about. That reporting was done officially by the government.
Yeah, another question, Mr. Krianga.
Eu, în același context, vreau să menționez sau solicit opinia colegilor noștri. Deci că pe platforma parlamentară de integrare europeană s-a abordat problema necesității instituționalizării unui mecanism de raportare către Parlamentul European despre activitatea Parlamentului pe dimensiunea armonizării. Cum comentați dumneavoastră cât este de eficient, cât este de bun pentru Republica Moldova sau pur și simplu asta e o povară asumată de Parlament? Vă mulțumesc.
We'll start from Csaba, then Bartosz, Milan and Martin.
Yes, so regarding the European Parliament. So if I think back, the basic structure was set up in 1994, of course, with the promulgation of the association agreement, and it was one single body, not more. It was the Joint Parliamentary Committee, because it had the main responsibility to head, a committee with the European Parliament. It's a permanent structure headed by European Parliament member and the Hungarian MP. They met twice a year, so it was a regular forum for discussion. And within the framework of the meetings of the GPC, all the issues which come up regarding integration, approximation, were handled. That was the main forum. So, and in the case of Hungary, the Hungarian side of a GPC was the members or some members of the Committee on European Integration Affairs. It means that the whole issue was centralized basically in a club of small number of MPs. And this made the whole process, I guess, quite efficient. So institutional relations above the GPC, there wasn't set up. That time, I guess, there was no such idea, but I also know that the European Parliament has changed in the last couple of years its approach to new members and to integration. So, but that's it for my side.
Yes, just like Csaba has said, the Joint Parliamentary Committee of the European Parliament and National Parliament was the right forum to exchange information, to exchange, to ask questions. So perhaps it was not reporting to European Parliament, but members of European Parliament could ask questions to the members of National Parliament about other things that the National Parliament did. But to comment your question, or to comment the idea of reporting, well, we should know what is the purpose of such reporting. Why are you talking about, what is the purpose, what was the idea behind such reporting of the National Parliament to European Parliament?
Deci despre ideea este ca Parlament să fie vizibil, ca lucrul Parlamentului să fie arătat către Parlamentul Uniunii Europene, să se arate dimensiunea sau volumul de lucru care se efectuează în cadrul Parlamentului. Și dacă Parlamentul examinează în termenii stabiliți sau întârzie, și mai departe.
Of course, okay. So, but of course, it's a national decision how to cooperate between national parliament and European Parliament. But I would say that visibility, of course, it's a very important aspect of Parliament activity. But visibility should be addressed, first of all, to national citizens. If you prepare, well, the Parliament can prepare such reports, such documents that can be addressed to your national citizens to show that the Parliament is active, that the Parliament is doing something. And such report can, of course, be presented also to the members of the European Parliament during the joint parliamentary meeting. Why not? But I think the first addressee of this of such report should be the nation or the citizens of the nation.
Milan, would you like to add something briefly?
Yes. Actually, maybe I would like to clarify the position of the European Parliament, why the European Parliament likes to communicate with the national parliaments. It is always about this constitutional disbalancing. So, on the level of European Union, the core work in the lawmaking is done by the institutions which are somehow more of executive nature. The national will is represented always by the government or by the ministers, part of the government. So the idea to communicate with the national parliaments is about getting used to this communication. Being a member of the EU, you have these common sittings of the EU affairs committees, the so-called COSAC. And that's the way how to communicate on the parliamentary level in order to get back to this constitutional balance from the point of view of the parliaments. So I think the core business has to be done by the government, and the communication between the parliaments is more of political nature.
A brief remark by Martin, and then we would like to continue with the last session.
So I think I really like what Mr. Hodas has said, because perhaps if there's any kind of reporting that you choose to do in any kind of forum like this, then perhaps it's also good to keep in mind that it shouldn't really be a one-way street, because the whole purpose of these joint parliamentary committees, if it's done in that way, or any kind of contacts with the European Parliament, is more that it should be about a dialogue, so that those counterparts are able to get information to your MPs, and your MPs are able to communicate that to their constituents and to the public. So perhaps I would think that the reporting should be, if you choose to do that in whatever way, it should be not a one-way street to inform somebody who's higher up, because that's probably a good way to make people not really like the European Parliament, because they're not really higher up in a sense. So it should be more as an opportunity to have some constructive dialogue, and perhaps that's really the whole purpose of friendship groups, for example, bilateral friendship groups with states in the EU or the Joint Parliamentary Committee, is to have a way to address the constituents in both ways. So it's not, I would hesitate to view it as reporting to someone higher, and I would see it maybe just as one of many tools that allow bilateral dialogue and informing citizens on both sides to build some kind of consensus. From the perspective of Moldova, if it's an MP that is coming from a political party that wishes to support further integration with the EU, then parliamentary diplomacy of this kind is a good opportunity to lobby for further integration and to lobby for further steps along the path of integration, and at the same time to get information that can be given to citizens about the benefits of integration. And you can have MPs also that will disagree and that will wish to voice their disagreements at this level. So the bilateral aspect, I think, is much more interesting for MPs, and the reporting can perhaps facilitate some kind of dialogue, but I don't think it should necessarily be seen as just this one-way street, rather as a basis for some dialogue. And if it helps with the dialogue, then why not?
Thank you very much. I would like to inform you that the experts are here for you. So basically, after the workshops, there is a possibility to have in-depth consultation between you and the experts. So in the afternoon, after the workshop, after 3 o'clock, the experts will be available for such meetings with you. So if you are interested in having individual consultations with experts on these topics, so please let us know. Let my assistant Viorica Ursahi, who was doing the registration, know that you are interested in meeting our experts for such individual consultations, and then we can arrange such consultation for you where you can discuss in more detail the topics that were raised right now. But now I would like to continue with opening the last session of our workshop, focused on internal regulations for Parliament, ensuring the role in EU approximation process. So basically, I would like to ask our experts to briefly show you how the structures in the Parliament were modified in order to fulfill the tasks related to EU legal approximation. And as usual, we would like to start with a brief introduction from the Hungarian side. So please, Csaba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much again. So before going to the internal structures, just one constitutional comment, because between 1994 and 2004, so between the membership, the only legal source and reference in the Hungarian legal system was the Act number 1 from 1994. So this was the sole legal basis on the level of Act which provided obligation to approximate our legal provisions. Why I'm saying this? Because the Constitutional Court itself discussed this issue, namely whether before the accession any kind of Hungarian legal norm can refer directly to any EU legal act. So this question arose in relation to competition law, when a ministerial decree referred to the competition law regulations of the founding treaties. And that time in 1998, the Constitutional Court declared that any direct reference to EU law is totally unconstitutional. It means that until 2004, there was no amendment of the Constitution taken place. And so all the constitutional changes entered into force following the membership from the 1st of May 2004. Okay, I'll just say it in brackets, but it's important to see that until there is no membership, or there was no clear membership vision, the Hungarian legal system was not amended on the level of constitution. So, but now back to the parliament and to internal regulations. The first sentence you can read, it's that there is no specialized model or centralized model for verifying the compatibility of draft legislation with EU law. So no special model, but a model was applied. And this model was actually similar to the basic legislative process. It means that when the government bill was submitted to the parliament, then there is no automatic procedure. First, a new bill is always verified by the so-called committee department. You can imagine a department where are 10 lawyers, and they just screening the new bills. And they make a proposal for the speaker which committee should be assigned to discuss the particular bill. Of course, they make this proposal to the speaker not automatically and not alone. They consult with the possible committees that would be later involved in the legislation. It means that within the parliamentary service, between the lawyers working for the committee department and for the individual committees and the legal department, so these three departments, there was a very close daily cooperation. Because what was in practice? In practice, the Committee on Constitutional Affairs was the lawmaking committee. Large part of the bills fall to the competence of the Constitutional Affairs Committee, also in the field of approximation. And what did other committees do? One keyword is selection regarding European Integration Affairs Committee, because one committee cannot and couldn't, or at that time, cope with all the approximation tasks. It means that already at that time, the secretariat of the committee was really focused on key bills belonging to the scope of the association agreement to discuss. Key bills, you know, for example, environment, agriculture. So, because these issues came up not just during the approximation process, but later on when it was implemented, when there was a delegation, etc., etc., etc. So that's why the selection aspect had to be really taken into account during the whole approximation process. It means that basically two committees dealt with the approximation issues, the Committee on Constitutional Affairs and the Committee on European Integration Affairs. I just say it in brackets that after the accession, the situation has changed. Now we still have a committee dealing with constitutional affairs, but the other standing committees are dealing with harmonization issues, which competence belong to the subject matter of the given directive or regulation. So now the situation has changed. So what I want to really underline, that there was a real internal cooperation between the three departments in order to make the legislation easier. This is one aspect. The other aspect, which was mentioned today several times, is the amendment issue. Because amendments, yeah, they are the tricky ones. They can make the whole legislation to a false conclusion. And basically, if a bill comes in, of course, there's a committee designated, and there is a colleague from the legal department who has to accompany the whole legal process within the parliament. And then this colleague from the legal department has to work with the lawyer working for the committee, which is designated to deal with the bill itself. You see that it's because, why? Because these, in each case, just 2-3 lawyers are involved, but they work together also with the sponsor of the bill, between the government official also. So without these internal and in some cases unofficial cooperation, we couldn't have provided an efficient legislation. Because what was the real role of the committees within the approximation and the legislation? we didn't have to issue any kind of legal opinion, but only just a recommendation. And maybe in English you feel difference, opinion and recommendation. Recommendation, it's a political summary actually of the opinion about the committee on the bill itself, and whether it is in conformity with the Hungarian legal system, constitution, etc., etc. But what is really important that if the discussion was held in the committee, there was all the time one or two aspects which was discussed more deeply, and in this particular case, it means that maybe one or two articles of a given bill was really discussed within a committee meeting. And after this meeting, maybe concerning that one or two article, an amendment had to be prepared. So that you see that the committee had to focus first just to a part of the legislation, and during the discussion, only just some part of the bill which had really political relevance. So this selective function is very, very, very important, because you cannot really simply compare the government structure and officials and background with the parliamentary background, because it's much, much larger, the expertise, etc., etc. Yes, and maybe one last aspect regarding this internal structure, because, amendments, I want to finish this comment. So if amendment was taken by the committee or by a member of parliament, it's possible, then we had to have the position of the sponsor of the bill. And usually the sponsor of the bill is one of the ministries. It means that on the committee meeting, the ministry official or state secretary is there and provides an information about the ministry position, usually. Because of the small time frames, usually what we got was a ministry position. It means that it was not always identical to the government position, because at the time of the committee meeting, there was no official government position because of the narrow time possibilities. So this was an issue which we also had to adapt ourselves to avoid these kind of difficulties, to reduce the number of meetings when there was no clear government position. Because if there is no ministry position at least, then the committee couldn't go forward with the legislation. So we had in the Hungarian National Assembly a relatively small number of colleagues which were involved in the approximation issues. I have to tell you, some colleagues from the legal department, some committee secretariats, and that's all. So it was not a large number of people, but it resulted in a very efficient work between those lawyers who really were involved in this process. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Milan, could you briefly tell us a bit more about the Slovak case in this regard?
Yes. It will be my pleasure, but it will be hard to add something more. I was wondering what to tell you new, but I will maybe comment on the initial comment of Csaba, this constitutional comment. We don't share this approach because we already opened our constitutional system 3 years before the accession. But in the rest, what you told us, Csaba, I have to say that more or less we share basically the same approach. That means we also had this committee on European integration. We also had this strong role of constitutional committee, but at that time, at the time of the accession, in these EU affairs, this constitutional committee was provided with some help from the Commission for Compatibility, which was under this Constitutional Committee. We also had a department in which was the specialized unit dealing with EU approximation, and we also had this experience of joint parliamentary committees with the European Parliament. So basically, from this point of view, it is, how to say it, all the same. But maybe to add some more information, it is important to realize that we were forced also to amend our legislative technique. Some aspects were mentioned before. So we have so-called legislative, the clause of compatibility, which enables so-called formal control of EU approximation. So the responsible people in Parliament can see that the sponsor of the bill is aware where the proposed bill is touching the fields of EU law. So there is the formal control. For example, this legal department and this approximation unit under this legal department, in our case, is preparing so-called 24 hours information for the Speaker of the Parliament. Speaker of the Parliament, in our case, is formally responsible for checking if the draft bill fulfills all the formal requirements, and there is one of these requirements, this clause of compatibility. So if there is a lack of this clause, the sponsor, the Speaker of the Parliament can ask the sponsor to correct, or the National Council, that means our Parliament, may decide the draft law will not go through the whole legal procedure in Parliament. Another issue of legislative technique is the so-called standpoint to the bill. It is also done by this approximation unit, but it is not more about the formal compliance with EU law, but it is also dealing with the material compliance. So if it is the legal text is really fulfilling the requirements of transposing a directive or implementing regulation of EU law. Then we developed these tables of concordance. I know you have it. Maybe just to mention that usually they are systematically used for directives. We don't use them for regulations, and as far as I know, they rarely are used for the implementation of regulations. Then we have this so-called Transposition Annexes. It is a tool, this labeling tool, so you can see, looking at the end of the bill, that this bill is transposing such and such directive, or it is implementing such and such regulation. And maybe I would like to mention just few problems coming from approximation. Special focus of the Parliament in the pre-accession period was the quality of the staff. So in comparison to the government, you always have in Parliament less staffers. So the staff had to be really good trained in order to deal with all the linguistic aspects. For example, the EU law is created in 3 languages, and then it is translated into 24 official languages, and you can, and all of them are authentic in the same way. So, and the translation is always connected to the mistakes. So that means that people dealing with EU law cannot stick just to one linguistic version. They need to be very well trained in other languages in order to control the content of the legal provisions. And maybe I would like to mention another problem of approximation. It is so-called gold plating. It happens before accession as well as post-accession. It means that you as a politicians play for the electorate the game that if you don't want to look bad, you keep to say to the electorate, it is not my invention, this wording of the proposed provision, but the bad European Union wants us to have this like that. So it is really dangerous, and I have to refer back to the quality of the staff, that you need really well-trained people to keep up with the government staffers and to discover that it is not the EU requirement, it is the personal requirement of individual politician. So, mulțumesc.
Thank you very much, and thank you especially for those remarks connected with training, because this is the first workshop of our twinning project, and in the future we will have several other workshops, seminars and trainings for you, so we will have more or less more opportunities to discuss in detail how the committees were functioning, how the legal department were functioning, how the committee secretariats were functioning. So all these topics will be addressed in December and February next year. So just to remind you that we will have a series of workshops on these topics. And now I would like to give the floor to Martin for his short remarks on how it was done in the Czech case.
So if we can go to my, oh, it's my last slide actually. Maybe I'll start with this. I know there's a lot of discussion here in the Parliament about rules and about the rules of procedure and about internal regulations. So I'll just compare it to our experience. I would say in terms of internal regulations, whatever works, regardless of the legal basis, but whatever in practice ends up working is the appropriate solution. So in the Czech Republic, apart from legislative rules and the rules of procedure dealing with the special fast-track procedure for quickly dealing with acts if needed, for passing them in an expedited procedure, the rules which helped Parliament most were actually contained in government resolutions, which were not binding as law, but which were respected in practice. So our experience was that these government resolutions worked because the line ministries respected them pretty much completely. We didn't need to put certain rules in law because in practice it was working at a government resolution level. So rules which really helped the Parliament were the government legislative rules and the various government resolutions on methodology for approximating legislation. These rules contained requirements that draft legislative acts needed to contain a detailed explanatory report divided into two main parts, into a general comment, which is what you have here, but what I haven't seen is, here I haven't seen explanatory reports article by article. So for each article, a discussion of, is this article an implementation article? What does it implement? So really an explanatory report going paragraph by paragraph in a sense, telling us exactly which article of which directive is being transposed. But even if it's a non-EU bill or a non-EU article, the explanatory report will give a little bit of explanation why this article is proposed in the following way. So the explanatory report was, I think, a little bit more detailed, and it was just in the government legislative rules, this level of detail. Also, the government legislative rules indicated that for each law, each article, if it was implementing an EU rule of law, then it would include, at the time it was a telex number, maybe some of you are familiar with these telex numbers, they're not used so much today, or at least the name and the number of the EU legislation that was being transposed. Again, article by article. Why was this really key? Because MPs, when they think about maybe amendments, it's important for them to know that this specific article is a transposition article, so they should be careful about the amendments. So giving that information in the explanatory report and in the text of the law was important so that MPs would know that, okay, this is a paragraph or an article which is implementing EU law, and it's important to be careful with any amendments. And of course, the requirement to have a table of concordance, which was additional to the detailed explanatory report. This was binding only the government, but since approximation was mostly done by government bills, it was sufficient. Of course, when you had an MP submitting a bill, a private member's bill, this was missing often, but the explanatory report was always in some level of detail had to be there, because at least the law on the rules of procedure indicated that an explanatory report had to be included with all drafts, including private member bills, and that at least in general it had to include a general evaluation of compatibility with EU law and international law. So the rules of procedure set very general requirements. You know, you had to have an explanatory report. It had to have a conclusion about compatibility with EU law and international law. But the more detailed aspects about table of concordance and exactly what to put in the explanatory report, that was specified in the government legislative rules and applied to government legislation. So those were internal rules which were really important, but especially the government internal rules were most helpful to Parliament. Regarding organizational structures, the Parliament, well, it had to establish very early on the Committee for European Integration, which became a focus point. And there was a choice to make whether EU-related bills should go only to the Committee for European Integration, or should they go to all committees, or to the substantive committees, which are the sectoral committees. And in the end, there was a strong role for the Committee for European Integration because of the need for a certain speed for a discussion, and it could choose to then refer the bill to a sectoral committee. There's a disadvantage that, in a sense, we're still having trouble with today, which is there was a feeling in the other committees that if it's EU-related, it's not really the work of those sectoral committees. So perhaps a more balanced approach where a bill goes both to a sectoral committee as well as to the European Integration Committee might be a lesson learned that we perhaps didn't do, that there was too much of a role only for this European Integration Committee whenever a bill was labeled as EU. And perhaps now, in terms of internal structures from the perspective of parliamentary staff, well, I think our staff was starting out perhaps in the beginning also with the need for trainings, and we still have a need for trainings even today, with the need, and we have an ongoing need for language training. So very early on, the Parliament made a decision to offer once weekly free language training. Employees were given a choice, so for about 2 hours each week, we have it on Mondays, employees attend language training. And I've seen a huge development over the past, well, I've been in the Parliament since 2003. Suddenly, our IT department is capable of participating in English language conferences. And suddenly all of the other departments, not only those people that are specifically hired to do EU-related work or international affairs work, but all of the departments are capable of participating in various discussions. So the language training, and it's an investment of the Parliament, every week offering free language classes during working hours, which is also a good incentive. You go there during working hours. That's been a huge benefit. Typically focusing on the working languages of the EU, so choice of English, French, German, but also Russian and also other languages depending on demand. Directors and higher level management have one-on-one training, usually with native speakers who come to their office and who do 1 or 2 hours every week of one-on-one language training, especially in English. So it's recognizing the fact that you have staff, and that staff may or may not know some languages, and it's good to invest in your staff. It's not a question of replacing staff, it's a question of investing in the staff. But also substantive trainings. In the pre-accession period, TAIEX was offering many substantive trainings for free. After accession, many of these trainings were paid. So there needs to be some kind of budget. But I think in your situation, you have more access to TAIEX for free seminars or for things that are at least partially funded. So it's a question more of making the staff available to attend these seminars. So some flexibility to allow staff to attend substantive trainings to develop expertise. What that means is that you're losing time every week with staff attending language classes and attending trainings, but on the other hand, you're gaining capacity. So it's a question of balance. And we used especially summertime periods for staff to attend summer schools if they were offered, or to attend seminars at times when the Parliament was less busy. There needed to also be not only a budget for these trainings and language sessions, but also a budget for books, so for the library to be able to purchase the key texts, and also to keep purchasing them as new editions came out, and also budget for other resources such as IT resources for the staff and so on. But also a budget for EU staff, because new staff had to be hired gradually over time. So today we now have an EU department within the Institute which has about 7 people. It was gradual, it was a gradual growth where initially we started off with lawyers and with other staff doing EU alongside their work, but eventually you needed to have a budget for new staff. So the vision is usually about 6 or 8 people to really be specialized. So it does have budgetary impacts, and I would say perhaps these budgetary impacts were more pronounced than the need for specific regulations, that perhaps if there's money for these trainings and for the language trainings and the substantive trainings, or the ability to make use of trainings offered by twinning projects and offered by other donors, then that's excellent. And the internal regulations will be highly specific to your country, whatever works. If you need a law to do something, then you need a law. If you don't need a law and you're able to get the work done with the government regulation like we had, then that's fine as well. There's no best practices, I would say. It's whatever ends up having the practical effect. The biggest changes to the rules of procedure happened actually after accession. So most of the things that were done before accession could be done based on what we already had, except for the staff that had to be recruited and trained. So that's all.
Thank you very much. And last brief remarks by Bartosz.
Thank you. Oh, Martin has just said what I wanted to say. So let me, at the beginning, return to Mr. Kranga's question concerning reporting to European Parliament. I think the answer to your question is a little answer about the role and the position of the European Parliament. When I started to work for the Parliament, and when I started to deal with European matters, I was told that the European Union suffers of the lack of democracy. Then the direct elections to the European Parliament were introduced, and since then I think European Parliament is the equal democratic partner to national parliaments. But on the other hand, after the Lisbon Treaty, a lot of new powers, new competences were given to the national parliaments, not to the European Parliament. So it seems that the member states of the European Union cannot decide which parliament should be more important, the European Parliament or the national parliament. My impression is, but it's only my personal opinion, my personal impression, that European Parliament wants to be the most important parliament within the European Union. And I think from the perspective of national parliament is that national parliaments accept that European Parliament is equal to national parliaments, but not more. I know there is a difference in the position of national parliament of a member state and national parliament of an associated country. But anyway, when you talk with members of with European members of the European Parliament, don't forget that perhaps this is not a very important parliament. Perhaps national parliaments are more important than European Parliament. Once again, this is my own opinion. But coming back to our topic, internal regulation structures. Once again, we have to talk about structures at political and staff level. At political level, it's easy, I think, in most or in all of the countries. There was a specialized parliamentary committee dealing with all the matters concerning European integration. The same was in Poland. First it was dealing with political matters, then it was dealing also with legal matters. At some stage we had two specialized committees, as I said in the morning. One was dealing with legal matters, the other was dealing with political matters. But at the end, this additional committee was introduced only for 2 or 3 years. Yes, 2 or 3 years to help Poland to speed up with approximation of legislation process. I think the more important are the structures at the staff level. Before the, can we move to the next slide? Before the accession, there were 3 units specializing in European affairs established within the Parliament, and they still exist. First, and I think the most natural, is the Secretariat of the European Committee. Of course, because they work for this committee for years and years, they've been working for years, they know a lot about European Union, especially they are experts in political aspect of functioning of the European Union. They can advise MPs on political matters. The second unit was the Parliamentary Center for European Documentation, which is the part of the Parliamentary Library. It was created in the late 90s or early 2000 years. At that time, access to all the European documents was not that easy that it's now, so such a body was needed for the Parliament. I don't know, however, we still need it, but anyway, it exists. All the materials are concerning EU matters are deposited within this Center for Documentation. And the third specialized unit that was established within the Parliament was the unit I work for. This is the legal unit responsible for, it was called, at the beginning it was called European Integration Unit. Now we are called International and European Union Law Unit. We started as a 5-person unit. Now there are 10 of us working within this unit. All of us are lawyers. I think majority, or well, not all, but majority of us has either academic degree in law or I mean academic higher than just legal studies, or a professional title of advocate or a judge. And since the very beginning, we were responsible for writing legal opinions concerning the conformity of the draft laws with the European Union law, and we are still doing this. But after the accession, we received other tasks. That's why there are 10 of us, not 5 as before the accession. Can we move to the next slide? Yes. What is very important for the parliamentary staff? They need to be qualified, highly qualified, to be the same position as the government staff, which is usually very qualified in its, well, the people who work in the ministry are very qualified in its topic. For example, if you work in the Ministry of Agriculture, you know a lot of agriculture. So we also needed to have someone who will specialize in agriculture. Of course, it's impossible to know as much as person who work in the ministries, but we had to specialize in several areas. So we needed to attend a lot of seminars. We needed to attend a lot of conferences. We needed money to buy books. Just like Martin said, you always have to read books. You always have to attend our conference, because even now we still need training. And fortunately, budget for our training and budget for our materials is so big that we cannot spend it. Every year, at the end of the year, we are asked to go to some conference abroad or to buy some other books, because there's still money, there's still some money left. I can say something more about the establishing of our unit, because it was also something a little strange. First of course, there was a political decision that the Parliament has to control somehow the drafts that were brought to the Parliament by the MPs, because, as I said before, the government refused to check the conformity of these drafts with the EU acquis. So there was a political decision taken that there should be a separate parliamentary legal service responsible for this, and our unit was established. But let's say that no one knew about us. We were not a secret unit, but we were somehow hidden. For almost a year, we were sent to many trainings and conferences, and we were writing opinions, legal opinions, on the conformity of legal drafts on each and every legal draft, but the opinions were sent only to the director of our office. They were not public, they were not sent to MPs, we were just training. After a year, we decided that we know how to write these opinions, we know the most common problems. We went to the Secretary General, and he decided to, together with the MPs, they decided that rules of procedure should be amended. And since then, I think it's since 1998, we are mentioned in the rules of procedure. We are mentioned. Our opinion is mentioned in the rules of procedure and is obligatory to all the drafts that are not brought by the government. And just like I want to confirm what Martin has said, that also languages, foreign languages are also very important. You are in the lucky position that Romanian is one of the official languages of the European Union, but even though I think foreign languages are important, okay, I'm just finishing. Foreign languages are important because not everything is in Romanian, or sometimes you have to compare different versions. Still, I read a lot of documents in English. I prefer reading in English than in Polish. Just last week, I had a case that I received a document, EU document in Polish, and I couldn't understand the title. I read it 3 or 4 times, and I couldn't understand what's going on. What is it about? Then I checked the English version, and I realized that part of the title was missing. Just completely, some words were missing from the Polish version of the title. So that's why you sometimes need foreign languages. Before the accession, within our unit, I think that we had, everybody was speaking English, plus we have people speaking French, German, Italian, Dutch, Hungarian, plus not within our unit, but within our office, we had people speaking Spanish and Czech and Slovak. So we could compare our documents. Okay, so I was told I should finish, so that's all.
Thank you very much. I would like to just briefly summarize what we heard during this workshop and then a little bit remind you what we are going to do in the future. So we have heard that all 4 national parliaments, okay, thank you, have deep, clear, conceptual approach when it comes to EU legal approximation, which was done not only at the political level, but also at the level of clear division of powers between the parliaments and the governments, all based by at least 2 cornerstones of this cooperation. And the first one is regular, up-to-date, accurate, timely share of information between the parliament and the government. And the second one was pointed out as the highly qualified oversight function done by the parliament towards the action conducted by the government. We also discussed several issues, the practical ones. For instance, it was mentioned several times that there's an obligation to introduce harmonization clause or transposition annexes directly into the laws that are adopted by the parliament. Or another practical issue that was mentioned here today was the fact that explanatory memorandums were more detail explaining in more detail how these draft laws are going to transpose particular articles of EU directives. All this information and tasks were done by the government and the parliaments, but without appropriate staffers in the parliament and in the government, it's not possible for sure. So that's why all 4 national parliaments introduced some kind of special training, some kind of special seminars, language courses for their staffers. I would like to remind you that this is only just the beginning of our work here. So the twinning project will last until the September 2019, so we have almost 2 years, and we are going to focus on various types of trainings, workshops and seminars, not only those ones of general nature, but we are going to bring experts which will provide hands-on training together with the counterparts from your parliament. We are going to have more peer review exercises. We are going to have practical seminars of how to transpose particular EU acquis in practice. So this is just the beginning of our joint story, of our twinning project story. So I will leave that this was interesting enough for you to come to our workshops in the future and to discuss and share experience with us in the future. So the next workshop will be in December, which will focus on the role of parliamentary committees in EU-related matters. And the next workshop will be in February 2018, which will focus on more how the parliamentary staff members can develop in practice. And once again, I would like to mention that experts are here for individual consultations with you. So if you are interested in discussing something into more detail, you can come to our office today in the afternoon, and the experts will be ready to discuss with you. But please let me know that you are interested in such consultations, because we need to arrange some practicalities connected to this individual consultation. So please let us know if you are interested in such meetings. And last but not least, after this workshop, the experts are going to prepare a training manual. It is a written document that will in detail describe what was mentioned and discussed here today. So you will not only receive this PowerPoint presentation, which you already have in the folders and in the electronic version, but you will also receive a written reference document, a training manual in detail describing what was said here today, that will be available for your use for the future. So I would like to thank you very much for your participation, and if you have any comments or the last ones or questions, so please, now this is the right time to have one or two last questions or remarks. So, yes.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. I have a question regarding the content, actually, and it's for Mr. Milan Hodas. So at the beginning, you mentioned the growing number of EU standards and the need to fulfill the current requirements, but also to prepare a context for the future one. In this context, I would like to ask you, how do you see the further development of the harmonization mechanism in your country? Of course, if you see a possible change. Thank you.
It is a complicated question. Actually, from the point of view of national harmonization, we use the same tools as we did in the pre-accession period, and I don't see any requirement to change something. But there is one important thing, that we can, as a member country, influence the content of the EU law. So we can influence the content of the directives or regulations. But from the national point of view, I don't see any hints to amend something.
Other last urgent question or remark? If not, I would like to... No, not. So I would like to kindly ask you to fill in our workshop evaluation form, because for us it will be a valuable feedback to, you know, accommodate your recommendations and observations into our future trainings and workshops. And I would like to thank you very much for your active participation today. So it was a pleasure to have you here and to be with you here and discuss with you all these topics together. I would like to thank our experts for national parliaments of EU member states. So thank you very much for your interesting presentations and remarks. And of course, I would like to thank very much to our assistants and our colleagues from the Strategic Development Unit for ensuring the organization of this workshop. And last but not least, I would like to thank also to our interpreters for a great job done. So thank you very much and hope to see you in December all. Thank you very much. Goodbye.